Hi, I'm Marianne Bryant, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer and founder of the Thelma Matilda Alves Foundation. Thank you for listening to our new podcast. This is the first episode, and in this episode, I thought I would talk about starting the charity, why I started the charity, and just give some background about the kind of climate and challenges that I face kind of running the charity as a small organisation in this climate. So really to begin with, I thought I would talk about why I started the charity. And really I started the charity because of several different reasons. Some being personal and some linked to more professional career and academic prospects. But on the personal side, I had my own mental health challenges. I deal with depression, anxiety, and most recently been diagnosed as neurodivergent with ADHD and dyslexia. And I always kind of dealt with the overwhelming moments of depression. And as I got older, as I entered adulthood, I found my depression really hard to deal with because I wasn't being distracted by teenage drama, or I felt like I couldn't really pass it off as hormones and just being a general teenager. And with that, I kind of needed to get more professional help. So I ended up kind of using my university at the time. I was at LSE, and LSE offered 6 free counselling sessions, which is a great offer, and I'm really glad that they have that resource available to their students. So I took on those, and I went in between classes or after classes and seminars, but I just felt as if they weren't helpful for me. My counsellor at the time was a white female, and while she was great and lovely, I kind of felt that kind of held me back from expressing how I truly felt about certain things, because I didn't want to kind of end up leaning into stereotypes about black mothers and black fathers to white women, and kind of dogging out or kind of confirming stereotypes that exist around black people. So I kind of held back from expressing how I really felt about things, or particular actions that I felt were harmful and hurtful to me. So that kind of didn't work, and then I kind of ended up going through a really bad bout of it where I couldn't work. I ended up quitting. This was after finishing my master's, actually. Ended up quitting my part-time job because I just was so unhappy and I couldn't bring myself to go to work anymore. And from that point, my mom kind of was just like, yeah, you need to see someone. So she had managed to find me a wonderful black female counsellor in my local area, who I worked with for just over a year. And she was wonderful. I loved our sessions. I really looked forward to them. I brought my mum into one session, and I was really able to be open and honest. And she got the cultural significance, the references, the family dynamics, the way I was, and I really got to learn about myself. And then kind of moving into that, I kind of was very aware that at the time I was working a good paying job, so I was able to shell out the £300 to £400 bulk that I paid for a set of sessions. And I realised that mental health and looking after your mental health is very expensive. If it's not paying for counselling or therapy, it's paying for medication. My doctor had written me a prescription of sertraline the antidepressant, and they are not free on the NHS, which I found very, very surprising. They used to cost me about £9 to £12 per subscription, and I think that is, again, a massive expense. We're talking about the cost of living crisis where people aren't having the disposable income that they had, and to get a pill that's supposed to help you with your depression, and it costing you £9 to £12 maybe every month or every 3 weeks is a ridiculous expense, I think. And also in that my doctor, and also kind of like going off that, not only is it expensive, but also for the doctors, the NHS, your GP, when you express that you are feeling depressed and unable to work and unable to find the will to live, and they just kind of write you a prescription and don't offer you formal counselling, or don't offer to put you on the NHS waiting list for counselling or therapy. As long as it is, I was never offered, which again kind of concerned me when I compared that to the treatment of some of my white female friends who had suffered from depression and anxiety, went to their GPs, and their GPs put them on the NHS waiting list. Mine did not, and I think that disparity alarmed me. And then moving into kind of writing my PhD proposal, and kind of looking at the statistics around Black women's mental health, and for some reason I didn't think that mental health was as bad in the Black community, especially as like a teenager, until I left my very predominantly white area and started to travel into South London and see more diversity. I think for me, living in a very predominantly white area, the people you see and hear suffer from mental health issues at that time were mainly white, right? We had, when I'm at secondary school, we had counselling, and a child psychologist come in and offer counselling, and many of the students that went to that counselling session were white. I never saw a Black student go to those counselling sessions, and again, I think that's telling of maybe the way that we Black people maybe exhibit and deal with depression, anxiety differently than to white people, but also the lack of support that maybe Black kids and adults get to deal with their mental health in this country. So for me, kind of coming from that climate, and basically only seeing white people suffer from mental health and receive mental treatment, I didn't really think mental health was a Black person's thing. So when I was reading the statistics around Black people's mental health and kind of evaluating and analysing my treatment, trying to gain mental health treatment through the public sector, through the NHS, and kind of being forced to have to go into the private sector and pay out money for my mental health treatment, I was completely shocked to find out that Black women statistically are more likely to suffer from anxiety and depression than white women, but are less likely to receive treatment. Like 29% of Black women suffer from mental health in comparison to 21% of white women and 24% of Asian women. So we are statistically more likely to be depressed and anxious, but still yet less likely to receive help. And when we do receive help, we don't find the talking therapies, the counselling adequate, because we aren't able to have the options of finding a Black female counsellor, a Black male counsellor, and when those options are limited, you don't feel comfortable expressing yourself to a white person. How well are you going to be able to deal and work through your mental health issues if you aren't comfortable in the space that you're being offered, right? So we're more likely to suffer from these things, and less likely to, and I think the differences there are, like, for the community, is while black women are more likely to suffer from anxiety and depression, common mental health disorders, black men are more likely to suffer from psychosis, so schizophrenia, and bipolar in comparison. So we definitely can see that the black community in this country are suffering from mental health issues, and as we know, this country is not interested in helping us at all. This is a clear sign of medical racism. This is a clear sign of medical apartheid, of the strong black women stereotype coming in, of the fact that we are not able, black women do not express vulnerability or do not express our sadness, our pains, our sorrows the same way that white women do. We don't have the allowances of white women's tears. We don't get to cry and feel vulnerable and weaponize our tears to our advantage. And I think that that really has played a massive part into the lack of treatment that black women get. Black women always seem to be strong, been able to fight through anything. And I say to people all the time that, like, just because I can do something, I'm high functioning, doesn't mean that I'm not drowning in the background. I've just learned from my mother, my grandmother, that I have to carry on with life. Like, I don't get to stop the same way that white people can kind of just stop and be like, I'm gonna take a break, I'm breaking down. I'm like, if I stop, I'm gonna be at scrutiny for everything, because I don't have the allowances that you have as a white person to not be scrutinized. And I think that that's a massive issue, because it plays into black people ignoring our mental health a lot. Black women just going, I don't have time to deal with this today, even though we are suffering. And I started this charity to kind of work on addressing that issue and creating a space for black women to speak about issues pertaining to black womanhood. I think now we are definitely seeing the intersection of gender and race discrimination for black women coming to play when we hear the abuse of child Q being strip searched as a young black girl, to Tim Westwood taking advantage and sexually assaulting black women and girls because he knew that he could get away with that as a white man, because the system, the police, the BBC were not interested in protecting black women. And creating the charity and creating spaces, online spaces, sessions, workshops for black women to come together and voice their frustrations, I think has been very transformative and healing. It's creating community very informally. I never kind of thought that it would do. It wasn't like a thing in my head of like, this is a community, but it really is a community. I often see like very frequent names pop up and come to the sessions and speak and talk and share their stories, and while there can be a lot of difference in some of the stories that people tell in the sessions, there is a lot of collective experiences too. And I think for me, and from the feedback I've gotten from running the sessions now for just over a year, that these spaces have been so important for black women to speak, to share, to reflect, and I'm really excited that I get to offer that to black women for free, because again, mental health is an expense, and I think it's a very expensive business. I think the way that self-care is framed as well is very much into, you put your money in and you'll get the good feeling out. I am just very adamant in this cost of living crisis to lower the expenses that black women have, because finance is a mental health, it's going to cause a mental health crisis in itself, and I don't want to add to that. I just want to provide space. So again, running this charity has been wonderful and I love it, and I really should have started it just to create space. It's not an alternative to mental health treatment. If people are suffering from anxiety, depression, OCD, psychosis, they are going to need to find professional help. But I think having the space, being able to talk, dialogue, connect, is so important. And Black feminist epistemology, Black feminist writers like Bell Hooks, Audre Lorde, Patricia Hill Collins have spoken about the importance of Black women's dialoguing, not only to the Black community but to the whole world. So yeah, it's been great. Okay, and then kind of shifting gears and moving on to the challenges that I face with running the charity. I think for me, I'm not of the business acumen, and as much as the charity sector would love to say that it is not business orientated, it completely is. The amount of red tape, financial reporting you need to share with other people, funders, grants, is fair, I think, but also it can distract from the work that you're doing and feel a lot business-like. I don't think there's enough discounts, enough allowances, enough free things for support for charities. A lot of these things come at expense, and to be honest, I was completely shocked. And it's kind of made me understand and rationalize why people say that charities shouldn't exist, because I guess charities are filling in a gap for the state, as the state's not been able to provide adequate help, so charities come in and fill that gap. But also it does become business-like because big charities, Mind, British Cross, all of these massive charities kind of suck up the majority of the money and leave the small charities that are doing ground level work, on the ground work, actually communicating and talking to the beneficiaries. The people who started the charities are working and talking to the beneficiaries, don't get like the trickles of money. The people that are really doing the hard work, really communicating, get the trickles of money, are the big organizations that get to run ads and all these ads, and get to run social media ads and have their name everywhere, and people can kind of recall them off the top of their head, get the big amount of money, but don't have the same ground level work, aren't in the community, aren't understanding, often will create services and not have any experience in the issue that they're actually creating services for. And that has become a really massive issue. That's very disheartening, because for me as a charity, we don't have a lot of expenditure, but we still need money to run. And it has been very hard to find financial help in this sector. For me, I've written probably about now 9 grants since I started the charity in 2020, 2020, started the charity in 2020, and I have been rejected from probably every single one except from 2, the Women's Resource Centre and the Albert Hunt Trust. Every single one has rejected me, and when they reject you, you don't get an explanation as to why. There is not a detailed explanation as to why. They say there's a high volume of applicants, which I completely understand, but there isn't feedback as to what you needed to justify. And sometimes I think that puts a lot of charities out, because while they're doing very important work, and the work is so important to the communities that they're in or they've built, it's hard to communicate that to somebody who is never had the issues that you're talking about, or the whole board of trustees that are deciding where the funds go are white men. How do I explain to a white man the issues of a black woman? Do you care? Those have been issues, and I often think that without having a grant come in, or ring fence grants for black female led organisations, I wonder how long I can actually continue to provide this space for black women, this charity, because at the end of the day I have my own expenses that I have to pay. I need to pay my bills, I need to eat. I can't run this charity from my own pocket, and there is a lack of help and space available when people have suggested that you hire a grant writer, but a grant writer can cost £400 to £500, and then if you win the grant, you have to pay them 2% of your grant. Again, it's money making. You need a treasurer to come in and do your finances. As a charity, people come and email me being like, I can find you a treasurer to join your board of trustees for £500. When your organisation has a bank account of £5 to £10,000, and you've got to pay people, you've got to pay for spaces, you've got to pay for software, you've got to pay for your volunteers to get DBSs. Do you have £300 to spare, especially if you're being rejected from grants that you're writing yourself? No, you don't. So it seems kind of crazy to me how money making this sector is, and how hard it is to sustain things. And I was watching the news the other day, and it was talking about the fact that the lack of help available for charities mean that a lot of charities are going to cease to exist over the next couple of months as volunteers start to move into full-time or part-time work to pay their expenses, as the money starts to dry up for people to sustain the services that they were providing. They're just going to cease to exist, and I truly believe that because I can see my charity going in the same way. So those are some of the difficulties I have faced, and I could speak on them forever. Running a charity has been a massive learning curve, but as I said, this is a new podcast that we're going to start, and we're going to invite service users. Hopefully I get some of the trustees on, volunteers on, to speak about their experiences with the mental health sector, any stories that they want to share, personal or just experiences or knowledge that they have that they can share via this podcast, so people can just put their headphones on and listen in their free time. I think will be wonderful. And if you would like to be a guest on the podcast, you can just email me at Thelma Matilda Alves Foundation at gmail.com, and you can send an email just telling me you would like to be a guest on the podcast, and we can kind of discuss it, go through that, go from there, and schedule an episode. If you've listened all the way through this, I hope that it was informative and you can kind of understand why I started the charity, some of the difficulties around running the charity, and being in the charity sector. And if you've listened the whole way through, thank you so much. I've never recorded a podcast episode. This is my first podcast episode by myself that I've recorded. So I hope it was informative. I hope it was enjoyable to listen to too. And I'll catch you in the next one. Thank you.